Hey, this is Rick again, your bike fitness coach. We got a special little interview today set up with two attorneys, personal injury attorneys. I work with one of them down in San Diego on bicycle cases. There's a lot of bicycles being hit in San Diego. Specifically, that's where he targets his audience. Anyway, on a given weekend through some of the areas of Oceanside, Carlsbad, and Sanitas, you can get 1,000 cyclists, maybe 2,000 an hour going through there. So there's a higher percentage, higher chance of getting hit by a car through those areas. Normally, cyclists are going a little bit slower, so the injuries are usually not life-threatening. People get banged up quite a bit, the bikes get destroyed, broken bones, etc., but the people normally survive. What we're experiencing now and seeing now is a lot of the e-bike injuries and deaths. E-bikes are going faster, kids are taking more chances. So how do we prevent the injuries and deaths? Recently, there's been, I think the attorney will discuss three of them, recent incidences. So this talk is going to be about instruction, safety, and also insurance. So stay tuned for a nice talk with and a lot of good information coming out. We're going to be also having a secondary talk in Spanish for a Spanish-speaking clientele. Stay tuned, and here we go. Welcome to Bike Fitness Coaching and 911law.com. We're going to be discussing e-bikes, the rules of the road, who can ride them, where to ride them, how to maneuver your way through traffic and the legal system. And with that, I want to introduce Richard Duquette, and then we'll get started in our little talk.
Thank you very much, Rick. I appreciate you having me. I've known Rick Schultz for many years. He's an expert in the way of bike fitness, coaching, and in a variety of other areas in the way of the bicycling world. I rely a lot on Rick when I have some questions. So it's great to have him invite me here to give this speech today. We're going to also be doing a companion speech in Spanish for our Spanish speakers out there because e-bikes are a big developing area of bicycling. We're going to be discussing essentially the rules of the road and some of the legal issues regarding bike safety for a bicyclist, a passenger, parents, and also bike shops. But this is generally focused on California law. And so with that said, it should be understood that we're not representing anybody, and this is for information purposes only. If you have a specific legal question, you should contact us. All cases are different and unique. But with that said, let's just talk about e-bikes and the rules of the road and insurance coverage. It's a big issue now, as you correctly pointed out, Rick, and there are a lot of severe accidents. Let me just explain a couple of them. Just recently, a couple days ago, a young 15-year-old was killed in Encinitas, California. About a year ago, almost, there was also a mother riding with her child on an e-bike in Carlsbad by the Carlsbad pool off of Basswood, and a motorist hit the e-bicyclist. So there's a variety of situations where e-bikes and bike safety become an issue. What's important to know is we want to make sure that people are educated and they're riding safely, but we also want to make sure that there's proper insurance coverage, because at the end of the day, your health insurance only goes so far. I mean, you may actually have health insurance, but it doesn't cover your loss of earnings or any disability that you might have, or certainly if there's a wrongful death, it does not cover that. So you want to make sure you have proper insurance. So we're going to talk about that. With that said, Rick, did you have
Yeah. So I can go ahead and start. I got a little script here. We've collected questions from the audience as well as some of Richard's on Richard's side. E-bikes are the future, and how do they relate to the rules of the road? Richard's going to discuss, do they have the same rights as other motorists? Is an e-bike a motor vehicle? Does it require a license? Does it require helmets? How does it compare to a bicycle, motorcycle?
Let me take those two questions. So right off the bat, bicyclists have all the rights as a motorist, but they also have the same duties. So they have the rights on one hand, but they have the duties to also operate safely. That's Vehicle Code Section 21200 of the California Vehicle Code. Specifically, a person riding a bicycle on a highway has all the rights and is subject to all the provisions applicable to a driver of a vehicle. So it goes both ways. With that said, let's just jump right into one of the most important questions. So how do we educate bicyclists or e-bicyclists? And that's a big issue because if you have rights and you have duties, and let's start with minors or kids that are going to school, many of them have no idea what the rules of the road are. Many of them, they're given a e-bike and they're out on the road and they're essentially just riding around without much training or education. So I've given this some thought, and I propose that we allow the teaching to be done by the teachers. And teachers are the best teachers to educate kids. And so to that end, I can just tell you this, many schools allow kids to ride e-bikes to school, but when they do that, they perhaps need a permit from the school, and the permit requires some education. So that's a start, because the kids all want to have the ability to ride their e-bikes to school, and the parents, of course, don't want to, always have to be shuttling the kids to and from school. So it behooved them to learn and then ride their e-bikes. Bike shop owners, they're another source of education when they purchase an e-bike, a parent. And these rules go to parents too. They can provide them a manual. They can take a few minutes to go through the manual with them, have the parent and the child sign off on the manual, perhaps give them online resources like the Bike Coalition, different online classes that perhaps they can take, and educate these kids, because this will actually help in some respect the bike shops. So there's a case that you probably are familiar with. It was called Molly's Last Ride, and I'll talk about that. And Molly was a passenger up in Palos Verdes, California, up by LA, and she was with her girlfriend, and they went down a hill on a rad e-bike, and there was braking on this steep hill, and unfortunately they crashed, and Molly died, unfortunately, which is tragic. And then, of course, everybody got sued, including the manufacturer. And one of the issues was the lack of education for minors and or educating the purchasers. And so I think bike shops would be best served if they really took a strong interest in educating the parents and the kids and documented that. And if they did that, perhaps we could save a life, and perhaps we could minimize their exposure. So one thing I would like to say is, when you talk about e-bikes and educating, who's going to pay for this? I mean, this costs money. People don't just take their time to educate. So there's as I'm understanding it, Assembly Bill 2028, Rick, and I understand it became effective July 20th, 2022. So it's been in effect for about a year now, almost a year. And what that does is the governor apparently signed this, and it allows for using school safety instruction time and the facilities, the time and the facilities. So this is a great opportunity, for these kids to be taught by real teachers about e-bike safety, especially if they want to get a permit. And the parents, I'm sure, would benefit from that too. So I think that's important. So with that said, the next question that you asked me is an e-bike a motor vehicle? And you might ask, well, why is that an important question? The answer is no. An e-bike, by definition, is not a motor vehicle. As a matter of fact, Vehicle Code Section 24016 says that there's three different types. 24016A says an e-bike is described in Vehicle Code 312.5A as a vehicle equipped with a operable pedal and motor vehicle of less than 750 watts. There's classes 1, 2, and 3. It's important. There's three different types. And I'll show you the poster in a minute. There's three different types. But the big thing is it a vehicle under 24016B? Person operating electric bicycle is not subject to the provisions of the code relating to financial responsibility, driver's license, registration, license requirements, and an electric bicycle is not a motor vehicle. Whereas if you compare that to the Vehicle Code 415, it says a motor vehicle is a vehicle that's self-propelled. So a motor vehicle, self-propelled, right? Gas-propelled. So this becomes a big deal. And why is this important? It's really important for your listeners to know that that when it comes to insurance coverage often is the end of the tunnel. I mean, it becomes really highly relevant. And so if you have an auto insurance, does your auto insurance list, for example, an e-bike? Probably doesn't. So initially, your insurance may not cover you for purposes of e-bikes. However, if you're hit by another person and you're not a motor vehicle, how might you trigger coverage? Well, you might trigger it if you're hit by another person who's underinsured a couple different ways. If you're hit by another person. And that would be in your underinsured motorist provision in your policy. And why is that? Well, it's because if you're not a motor vehicle and you're hit by somebody else, another vehicle, what you might be is what they call a underinsured or underinsured motorist victim. And there's a case by the name of DAUM, D-A-U-M versus USAA, 2005, 125 Cal. 4th, 599. And basically that says that you're essentially a pedestrian. And you're going to laugh at this quote. The appellate court justices had some fun writing this. And basically what it says is, in summary, under the insurance code 11580.2, it mandates underinsured UM coverage, that's uninsured or underinsured, to the named insured, if you have a policy, whether or not the individual is in a motor vehicle, on a horse, a motorcycle, a bicycle, or riding stilts when hit by another motorist who's underinsured or uninsured. So long as there's no exclusion that applies, which there isn't at this point, there's not for e-bikes, you're considered a pedestrian. So you're not a motor vehicle, you're considered a pedestrian. And what that means is you may actually trigger insurance under your own auto policy, kind of like if you're hit on a bicycle. It's the same thing. So it's a big deal if you're hit on an e-bike to trigger insurance coverage. And the way you do that is, perhaps the bad guy has insurance. That's one way. Another way is your own auto policy may kick in if the bad guy is not or has inadequate insurance. And in For example, in Southern California, I understand at least 85% of the population is underinsured or uninsured. So you better take responsibility and get good underinsured motorists. Another thing you might do is to protect yourself, look for the insurance from the bad guy. You might also look to your own auto policy, underinsured motorists, like I said. But you can also, this is a newly developing area, these billion-dollar insurance companies are now issuing motorcycle policies with e-bike coverage. So there's now e-bike insurance. So you can shop around, and if you shop around, I like Safeco, that's a start, and they will offer e-bike insurance. So then there's no debate about coverage. You just buy insurance that covers your e-bike. So if you're hit by a bad guy, you have underinsured motorist coverage. Or if you hit somebody, or if a parent buys an e-bike for a kid, and the kid lives in the house, they're considered a resident relative. They may actually have insurance coverage under their own e-bike policy. So that's another thing to do. And so again, that's what they call, you can shop for insurance coverage. So I think that's really, really important. And I think that you're best served. So let's talk about this for just a second. There's a couple examples that I wanted to show you, but here's a list. And if you contact Rick Schultz, I'm not going to publish this online. I have a list, a 2-page list, work product of different insurance vendors. And one of them that I like is Safeco. And basically for $412 a year, you can get a $250,000, $500,000 policy with MedPay coverage, property damage, uninsured, underinsured motorist coverage. You want to back that up by an umbrella with underinsured motorist coverage too, an umbrella policy. And so then if you're riding your bike, or one of your kids are riding a bike, they hit somebody because they're negligent for some reason. The parents don't get drug in without any insurance. You have some coverage here. You want insurance coverage if you can. Or if your children are hit by somebody, they can pick up insurance coverage if the bad guy has very little insurance. So Rick Schultz has a list of different vendors that we've done some research on. Here's a case up in LA, and this is a 40-page lawsuit. This is a case called Jonathan Stens, SAPIR, etc. versus Rad Power Bikes. So this is for the wrongful death case. This is the Molly's case where they sued everybody, including the bike shop. So the bike shops ought to train as much as possible and educate. The parents ought to get good insurance so you avoid being drug in without any insurance coverage. Down in San Diego, there's another case that's pending, and this is a public record. This is a motorist that actually hit a bicyclist, an e-bicyclist, and killed the mother. The child lived. The motorist was charged with vehicular manslaughter, misdemeanor vehicular manslaughter, not gross negligence and not with alcohol, basically for violating a statute. There's a lot of people that are getting hit and killed, and I handle those type of cases, which are wrongful death cases. And I handle them to try to recover, as much as possible for the families and the heirs. So these are some of the examples. This is why insurance is very, very important, and this is why you have to make sure that the kids are trained. So let me. You can leave that up for just a second. This is. You can post that there, Rick. That's the San Diego, the Bike Coalition. You might not be able to see everything, but that's fine. Here are some of the examples. Here's my red pen, but you have e-bike rules, helmets, types of e-bikes. There's 1, 2, and 3. So there's under 20, there's throttle assist, and then there's pedal assist up to 28. And the e-bike stops at that point. So these are the types of issues to be aware of. There's rules of the road. Helmets are required. You should make sure they're properly secured. And you should also pay attention to the types of e-bikes. Where to ride. Depending on the type of e-bike, you can ride on certain areas. Type 3, the fast ones, really are limited. They limit where they can ride quite a bit, whether it be trails, sidewalks, etc. Passengers, this is a big issue now. In fact, in Carlsbad, or strike that, in Encinitas, they're now developing rules for passengers. Is the seat big enough? Is there a strap to hang on to? Should they not? There's a rule that's outlawing riding on the handlebars, which makes common sense. But I mean, for goodness sakes. But passengers, like in Molly's case, are a big issue. The amount of power and visibility. These are some of the issues that the Bike Coalition can train, and these shops can train these kids and parents on. I'm finding a lot of adults are riding e-bikes because, the baby boomers are now wanting to stay active, right? I mean, they want to stay active, but they want to get out there. So having a pedal assist does help. If you would take that down, Rick. You can take both of them down. Here's another poster, and this is the California Bike Coalition, and this is a great chart. And this chart talks, that's good. It talks about the type of bicycles, class 1 and up to 20. And you don't need a driver's license. You don't need a license plate. You got to wear a helmet under 17. Basically, they can ride anywhere. Class 2, there's some limitations. Class 3, these are the faster ones that go up to 28. And there's limits on where they can go. They don't want these really fast bikes to be riding in a congested area with other bicyclists or pedestrians. So this is a simple chart that if you go to the California Bike Coalition, People for Bikes posted, great chart. It gives you the rules and regulations, but generally most bikes are class 1 and they're under 20.
One question came up.
Sure.
These are all pedal assist on these here? Or these are pedals? They have pedals and
They
cranks?
have pedals. Class 1 and 3 definitely have pedal assist. Class 2 has a throttle. So those would be the difference. Class 1 is a pedal assist. You have to pedal it, and what you can do is you can then adjust. There's usually like a little button on the handlebars, and you can adjust the level. It can be eco mode, it can be mountain, and then it can be turbo. So there's oftentimes 3 different ways to push a button on the handlebars, and that bumps up the speed of the e-bike. That's how you ride it. But you have to be pedaling in order to trigger it.
And one more question came in about there's a certain class of e-bikes that are like motocross motorcycles that have foot pegs and no cranks. Where do they fit in?
Foot pegs are becoming a big deal. Bike shops should be, well versed at making sure that if a purchaser is buying a e-bike and they intend to have passengers, that they have foot pegs, perhaps a strap, in order to properly to carry the passengers. If it's a motorcycle, meaning it can actually travel faster than 28 and it's electric, that's in a class of its own, and those are really highly scrutinized and often limited as to where they might ride, because they're almost like a car, but they can travel, some of them up to 50 miles an hour. Okay. Can you pull that down for just a second? So at the end of the day, what happens is when somebody gets hurt, if there's a loss of earnings, there's a disability or a death, nobody wants to see anybody injured. Perhaps by educating everybody and you helping us with the seminar today, Rick, and properly fitting people to ride these, especially, You might consider pegs, handles, adjusting the seats, the handlebars, etc. You might actually make it a safer vehicle, electric vehicle for these end users. But at the end of the day, it comes down, and I find in many cases, to the money. And this is a stack of money, of $100 bills. It comes down to insurance. And I think what's often overlooked is insurance coverage. Again, you want to make sure you have a good auto policy so that you might have coverage if hit, or if one of your family members is hit as a resident relative. You might get trigger coverage under the underinsured motorist provision because you're not a motor vehicle, you're considered a pedestrian. You might actually try to get insurance or money from the person that hit you, but sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes they don't have insurance. So again, having your own policy is helpful, which is your auto policy. But the safest way to go, one of the safest ways to go, is to just buy e-bike insurance. And Safeco actually has e-bike insurance. And I tell them, skip the pretty helmet, get the e-bike insurance for $400, for goodness sakes. And get the underinsured motorist, get an umbrella. So I think those are some important factors. It comes a lot of times down to the money. So let me just talk about some of the rules of the road. There are limits on where an e-bike can ride, depending on the e-bike. Again, helmets are one thing. I wouldn't distinguish having a helmet 17 or 18 years old. I'd just have a helmet, but have a certified consumer product approved helmet. They only work up to a certain amount of force. They're not a fix-all for everything, but they do help. You should wear one if possible. And certainly your passengers should wear them. And they should be properly affixed and snug. I see a lot of these kids are a little loosey-goosey. They have the straps hanging down. They think it's cool to look like, slack, but it's not a good idea. They should be properly fit. Any passenger absolutely should have a helmet. From a motorist perspective, remember, if you're a motorist, you should remember, if you're going to pass an e-bike or a bicyclist, give them 3 feet. And in fact, if you can, and it's possible, move over into the adjacent lane away from the individual. Not just 3 feet, give them an extra lane if possible. I just did that the other day. I saw them. I moved over into the adjacent lane. Instead of just moving over 3 feet, I gave them an extra lane. The other thing you should know is bikes can proceed against a walk signal. I see this a lot, is bicyclists riding through the crosswalk. But they still must yield to pedestrians and other vehicles, and that's vehicle code 21456.3. That's operative January of 2024. So bikes can walk across, but they got to yield to pedestrians and other vehicles. So you can ride in a crosswalk. That's a good thing. So Carlsbad, as you know, set a state of emergency because of all the e-bikers and the accidents that were happening there. I just had a case, which I think is something that's important. He's a senior, and I've taken a special interest in baby boomers or seniors that are riding e-bikes. He was riding along in a bike lane, crashed, no fault in theory of his own, and he had a severe brain injury. And so we got the $100,000, but there were $1.2 million in bills. And again, e-bikes can be very dangerous if you're hit by another person or there's negligence out there. But the health insurance is a very important issue as well, because oftentimes they want to claw back the money from your recovery. And in our case, just a little brag, a selfish brag here, I was able to get rid of the $1.2 million in medical bills on the clawback from his health insurance, and split the settlement. There was only $100,000 available, and everybody made some money. The client made some money. I got him a new e-bike, and the the health insurance got a small percentage, very, very small percentage of the medical, so they had to drop their claim. But it just goes to show that seniors are riding e-bikes quite a bit. Again, parents, you ought to do everything in your power to educate your kids. You should definitely get insurance. And you should, when you get the policy, identify on the page of the policy, describe the e-bike and describe the residents in your family, so that when it comes time to debate coverage, insurance coverage, there's no debate with the insurance company. The bike's covered, everybody in your family's covered. You want to make sure that you give the insurance companies very little wiggle room to get out of it. You want your policy to be in force. This would be, for example, on an e-bike policy. So make sure you identify that. That's a tip. I think bicycle clubs they should begin offering programs for kids, and they can do it. A lot of the parents probably want their kids to ride with them, or they ride with their kids or families. The bike clubs could do a big public service, I think, by offering e-bike classes on bike safety. Bring the kids under their wings and teach them a little bit about them. Bike races. They should perhaps, before they do a race, teach kids about it. There's quite a few off-road races. Great opportunity while the kids are there. Teach them about e-bike safety. And I think this helps out, or could help out quite a few people. Do you have any questions that perhaps I can answer for you, Rick?
Yeah, one other question came in, especially from San Diego. There's something called a Shero. Most motorists don't know what that is. What is that? What does it look like, and how does that work?
A Shero is like, let's use one of our posters.
It's right here.
And we can post that. A Shero is, you might drop that down just a little lower. There's a Shero. I'm pointing here to a bicycle, but it looks like a couple chevrons or peaks, like a corporal's badge, a shoulder patch, and they're oftentimes painted in the roadway. And basically what that means is the road is too narrow for a bicyclist and a car to ride side by side. And there's always the chance somebody's going to get sideswiped or doored, hit by a door, a flinging door. I get a lot of those cases. And so a Shero is just it's a common engineering and bike safety symbol that's spray painted on the road to warn the motorists that they're going to have to share the lane with the bicyclists, and the bicyclists can also take the lane perhaps under those circumstances, but don't just assume that if you're riding that the motorist is actually going to yield to you. You should still be mindful of the fact that there's a lot of distracted driving, people on cell phones, drugs, alcohol, and just because you're riding in a lane that has painted Sheros, there's a lot of them in Oceanside, it doesn't mean you're in a bubble of safety. You still have to use your common sense. So Sheros are a good tool to help educate and communicate. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you. And one last question came in about types of bike trails. You mentioned
There's all kinds. There's under the codes, there's 4 different types. There's class 1, 2, 3, and 4. And without going into all the details, some are more protected than others. Some are like two-way routes. Some are basically routes where bicyclists can travel that are posted with a marked bike lane. Some are trails, and others are actually dedicated with barriers. And so those are important to know in terms of when you ride and where you ride, what kind of a route you're on. There's also off-road trails, and there's been some limitation posed regarding where e-bikers can ride. So you got to be mindful and look for the signage. Sometimes in the national forest, they don't permit e-biking. Sometimes there's actual trails where you're not allowed to e-bike. I'd like to see e-biking. To me, I don't think it's a matter, my personal opinion, I don't think it's a matter of what type of an e-bike you have. I think it's a matter of how responsibly you ride it. And if you ride it responsibly, the e-bike responsibly, you should be able to have all the freedom of everybody. I don't think they should discriminate based on the fact that you're riding an e-bike. I just think you should take the responsibility of riding safely. And if they do, then perhaps we can open up these trails. I think they're the future. I think we need to sell more of them. I think they're a great tool, great recreational tool, health tool, and I support any shops that sell them. But I'd like to see the education ramped up. I'd like to see more education, and I'd like to see more e-biking. So Does that help you?
Well, thank you, Richard.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Again, Richard Duquette, this is California focused. There's no representation implied or assumed here by our discussing these in terms of any case. If you have any questions, you certainly can call. This is intended to be a public service. We are also going to be doing a program here similar to the one I just did in Spanish with a Spanish-speaking attorney, Irving Pedrosa. He's a friend of mine. We've worked on many cases together. I highly recommend him. And so if you have anyone or the Hispanic community is interested, which I'm sure they are, then we have it also. We'll be doing this in Spanish as well. I think there's a lot of people, blue-collar people, not just recreationalists, that are riding e-bikes. I think it's economical. People are riding at night, in the mornings. They're going to work on e-bikes, and I think it's the wave of the future. They're not that expensive, and they're really, really helpful. And I think for people that are working and recreating both. So thank you very much.
Well,
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Okay, it's a pleasure, Rick,
And
as always.
We'll get our next talk going.
Thank you.